Verse, and today I'm going to be giving you a little progress report on The Famished Road by Ben Okri. I feel like I should note that The Famished Road draws heavily on Yoruba folklore and Yoruba cosmologies, and I am not Yoruba. I don't have a whole lot of knowledge of those things, so, take my opinions with about this much salt. I started reading it before the Black Literature Challenge, but I continued reading it for the Black Literature Challenge, which was hosted by Seiji of the Artisan Geek. And as expected, I'm still not done. I'm a quarter, maybe a third of the way in, and I really don't have an ETA on when I think I'll be finished. Maybe by the end of April. It's a little slow for me just because of how the characters are developed, and just it generally isn't very plot driven. It's kind of episodic. There'll be a couple little different narratives going along, and there doesn't feel like there's this big overarching plot. And so I don't really feel like a very big drive to what happens next, what's going on. It's a little bit more contained than that. I was reading interviews kind of trying to figure out what was the impact of this book, and maybe find some outside sources that would get me really pumped to get through it. And I read in an interview with Nydia Okorafor that this book really influenced her writing. I'd be really interested if she was interviewed or said anything more about it, because I so far haven't really seen anything where I'm oh wow, I can really see the influences. It's called The Famished Road, and I think it was Lagoon by Nydia Okorafor, there is an actual road that is very hungry and eats things, but other than that, I haven't seen anything where I right away guess that oh wow, this is the Famished Road influence. But to get into it, so in the Famished Road, there's Ozaro the Obanji who lives with his family in a Nigerian apartment complex, and it follows his wanderings through life because he's an Obanji, a child who still has tethers to the spirit world, and so he gets kind of dragged into the spirit world at times, or into adventures. Spirits will kind of see him and mess with him. And Ozaro is generally a wanderer. Just for fun, he kind of goes exploring, and that gets him lost a couple times. And also, I just realized as I was going through the book that there isn't a whole lot, or at least we don't get a whole lot of insight into Ozaro's interiority. Interiority is the idea that we all have motivations and things that we're thinking in our head, or things that influence our actions that a passerby might not see, but it's there. And as I was reading this, I was realizing that we don't really know a whole lot about what Ozaro feels or what he thinks. We can assume that, for example, he really loves his family, because when there are disputes between his family, he tries to intervene. When he sees his parents in distress, he'll try and comfort them. But I can't think of a time where he says I wanted to protect such and such, or I wanted to keep such and such safe, or I'm scared. I don't think those are things we ever hear him say, but we know he's scared because he will scream or he'll run away from something. And I feel like this is really perfectly displayed by this one scene where there's this disease going around, and people are very sick, they're vomiting all over the place, and Ozaro's kind of walking somewhere, and someone vomits on him, and there isn't a whole lot of comments on oh that was disgusting, or oh this makes me feel this way. The next thing you know, he's just kind of going to get some rocks, and I was very confused because the rocks aren't described as being particularly interesting, so it's not he's getting the rocks to collect. So he's getting these rocks, and his dad comes up and asks him, "What are you doing with those rocks, son?" And Ozaro's "This lady just barfed on me, I'm gonna go throw these rocks at her." And his son's "My boy." And I felt that is sort of a typical characterization of Ozaro, where we're not necessarily told what he's thinking or feeling or why he's doing what he's doing. We kind of have to guess based on his actions. So Ozaro has a mother who is describe her as very patient, very long-suffering. I feel like she goes through a lot. She's a hawker in the market. And his father is a laborer. He carries very heavy bags of cement and rock to places where they're needed. And his father is very volatile. He's very moody. He gets drunk a lot and will come home and beat Ozaro or beat his wife. And he also has a lot of shame around the job that he has in his station in life. And then there's Madame Koto, who owns a local bar, and after Azaro first wanders away and gets lost, she pays Azaro's dad to have him come sit in her bar after school to keep him from wandering. And she is generally accused of witchcraft by all the villagers, and Madame Koto's bar is where most of the spirit encounters happen. If I were to describe the Famished Road to someone who might be interested in reading it, I feel like I would say it's like Spirited Away, but with almost none of the whimsy. Like in Spirited Away, there is this young child who is experiencing these supernatural elements, but with Spirited Away, where you kind of get familiar with the spirited world and get accustomed to the spirit world, in the Famished Road that never really happens. Spirited Away, we see these spirits, and at first they're very terrifying, they're very bizarre, but then over the course of the book, you get kind of acquainted to them, and that's sort of where the sense of whimsy and magic comes in. And in the Famished Road, you never really get too used to the spirits showing up. They're kind of always in the threatening and bizarre stage. There are spirits that come up and try to kidnap Azaro. The spirits are always described as having deformations or things of that nature. The way their proportions are described are more grotesque than anything. And also just Azaro's life, even outside of the spirit world, is kind of sad. His family is very poor. They live in this apartment complex, and they owe a lot of people money, so they keep getting harassed by creditors. And on top of that, just regularly throughout the book, they'll mention that they can hear rats in their apartment. It comes up several times, as Azaro's going to sleep, it'll be and then you can hear the rats chewing on the food. So things that that are regularly occurring, just out of nowhere, rats eating things, or foul smells from latrines or spoiled food. While I felt Spirited Away kind of had all of those elements, I felt Famished Road falls on more of the grotesque / bizarre side of those elements. They never really let you get comfortable with the spirit world, and honestly, you aren't ever really comfortable in the human world either. My discomfort in both worlds might have been sort of a narrative device on Okri's part, something to make the reader feel like they're experiencing what an Obanji, or in this case Azaro, is feeling. Not comfortable in the spirit world, which he has forsaken to live as a human, and also still not comfortable in the human world because of his tethers to the spirit world. I felt the scene that really solidified that connection for me was when Azaro goes to the town square / the town market and sees where his father is working. There's a bit where he describes one of the other laborers, one of the other men, who's carrying one of these really, really heavy sacks of salt. The way he's describing the man's actions and how the man looks really reminded me of the tone and sort of some of the word choice and stuff around how the man was described. Really reminded me of how the spirits were described, and I feel that was what solidified that connection for me on how Azaro kind of feels out of place, or I guess in how both the human world and the spirit world are kind of maybe not hostile, but hostile or uncomfortable for Azaro. And I thought that the way Azaro was handled was very interesting. I had mentioned to a friend that just in terms of the overall structure, seeing a lot of similarities to Amos Tutola's My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, just in that it has the same encounters with the bizarre and the spirits out in the wild. In that book, it's more centered out in the forest and the wild. And Sarah mentioned that they would be more interested in comparison between this and Freshwater, which also features an Obanji main character. And as I was thinking about it, I thought it was just interesting how Azaro is an Obanji, and we don't really know what he's thinking or what he's feeling. We don't spend a whole lot of time in his head. And then in Freshwater, we spend so much time in the Adal, who's the main character's head, pretty much all of it. It's hard to tell what's actually happening in the outside world because so much of it is filtered through all these different personas and spirits who inhabit her mind. So I just thought that was interesting. Another interesting difference I saw between Freshwater and Famished Road was what the Obanji's discomfort in the human world was rooted in. I felt like Azaro's discomforts in the human world are like partly his experience like as an Obanji, like, you know, it caused a lot of familial strife that he just like kind of disappears for a long time, and that he sees things that like other people aren't seeing or can't really explain. But also I felt like a large part of what makes the human world uncomfortable for Azaro is just the poverty that he lives in. Poverty affects like him being able to find peace in his house. Like he's getting harassed by creditors, so like his house is kind of like not really a shelter. You know, his access to food, his living conditions, and it even, I felt like it exacerbated like the family dynamics a lot. So I felt like in the Famished Road, like there's a lot more like external circumstances that make the human world uncomfortable for Azara as an Obanji. Whereas in Freshwater, I felt like from the beginning, it was kind of established that no matter what body the spirits had been born in, things would have been kind of uncomfortable for them. So like the Ada does undergo some very traumatic experiences, but just sort of how the spirits are introduced in their life and sort of like the foreboding slash foreshadowing in the beginning, I at least kind of got the feeling that like no matter what body these spirits had born in, they would have kind of like chafed at the human experience a bit and chafed at the body a bit. And so a lot of the discomfort in the spirit world felt like a lot less like from external forces. It felt more like internal and more like intrinsic to them, like just being in the human world and just existing. Back to the Famished Road, I felt like it was kind of funny in like a sad way sometimes, like when it's revealed that Azara was picking up the rocks because he's going to throw them at the person who puked on him. Like sort of like that, like the incongruity is kind of humorous to me. It's like a scene where politicians are giving out dried milk to the villagers, trying to like get in their good favors and get their vote, and people just kind of like get into a frenzy over this milk, and they're like fighting over it and stuff, and in the process the milk spilled everywhere, and it's like chaos, like people are hurt, people are trampled, and there's one woman who like has a rock thrown to her face, like in the course of trying to like fighting to get some of this milk for her family. And like after everything's calmed down and everyone's kind of dispersed, she's like, I'm not going to vote for those politicians anyway. The humor in the situation comes from the futility of the woman's actions, or the politicians' actions too. Like they put all this effort into organizing this thing, and all the townspeople like put in all this effort trying to get some of it, and ultimately it didn't win the politicians anything, and like it barely got the townspeople anything. I don't know if it's like quite gallows humor, but it sort of has that feel. That's the Famished Road. I still have a ways to go, so I don't know if I'll be doing updates every month or not, but we'll see. I might have more to say about it as I get further in. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to talk about anything you've watched in the video, or like give me recs or something, please comment below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching.